You're listening to the Platform Engineering Podcast, your expert guide to the fascinating world of platform engineering. Each episode brings you in-depth interviews with industry experts and professionals who break down the intricacies of platform architecture, cloud operations, and DevOps practices. From tool reviews to valuable lessons from real-world projects to insights about the best approaches and strategies, you can count on this show to provide you with expert knowledge that will truly elevate your own journey in the world of platform engineering.
Welcome to the Platform Engineering Podcast. I'm your host, Corey O'Daniel. Today I've got with me Alex Voorhees, Vice President of Cloud Engineering at 66 Degrees. 66 Degrees is a professional services firm specializing in helping orgs migrate to the cloud and build modern platforms that empower their teams. Alex has a wealth of experience in managing cloud migrations and tackling the human and organizational challenges that you see often with these transformations. Alex, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Looking forward to talking.
Yeah. So to kick things off, could you just tell us a little bit about your background and like where you started and how you kind of worked your way up to VP of Cloud Operations or Cloud Engineering?
Yeah, definitely. So I joined a startup as a software engineer. I'm still at the same company. We have a different name, but it was a 5-person startup at the time when I joined. And I was doing a lot of custom software development. And I've been really fortunate to kind of grow in tandem with our organization. So as we've grown and expanded into, work with more enterprises, I've been lucky enough to kind of grow up with the org, if that makes sense. I've spent time on our solutions team and our sales team, and then leading professional services team, which is what I'm doing right now.
Very cool, very cool. And so you guys work with like a ton of different types of organizations, and you specifically focus on these cloud migrations, like app modernizations, right?
Yeah, so we work across enterprises and medium-sized corporations, focused on 3 kind of main big pillars of work. The first is cloud engineering, which is what I oversee. That's infrastructure, DevOps, and ultimately that kind of manifests itself in a lot of migration work. We also have a data practice that focuses on pipelines and analytics platforms, and then our AI practice, which has been exploding, as one can imagine, and focuses on model building and MLOps, and that good stuff.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So what I'd kind of love to know is one of my things that I'm very, passionate about, excited might be the right word, but, there's a lot of operational knowledge that we're not that we're losing per se in the cloud, but every year we're making more and more engineers, and like people don't really learn the cloud until they're in production, right? And so This has been a kind of a passion project of mine. One of the reasons I started this podcast was just to kind of talk more about operations, more about engineering. But you guys are kind of like facing that problem, but at scale, right? You're working with a lot of these organizations that like may or may not have cloud experience, but they're trying to move there. And so, what I'd really love to know is like, what types of challenges do you see with these orgs that they may have like traditional sysops, admins that are working in these data centers and then are getting presented with the cloud for the first time, where most of it is software.
Yeah. I think I go back and forth on this, but it's really a people problem is what we find is the hardest problem to solve when we're working with organizations. And what I mean by that is we're introducing kind of new skill sets for engineers to learn and new business problems for organizations, right? So, some folks leaving a data center aren't used to deploying, for example, an active, Kubernetes cluster, where they have to be live in 2 regions, and that's a huge like organizational lift and kind of mind shift for that team. The joke that we often make and we run into, and I've had a lot of CIOs tell me this, is we've done a great job building a data center in the cloud. And so what they mean by that is they've kind of regressed to the mean a little bit of, instead of using that journey to the cloud as a possibility to transform, they just take status quo and move it to a different data center. And that is not what we're trying to do. And what we have found to be really successful with these transformations, and especially with large enterprises that might not move as fast as like a nimble startup, is is establishing relationships in multiple levels of an organization. You need executive buy-in at some point for like, kind of nuts and bolts budget and, top down kind of like mandates, but being able to work with the engineers kind of hand in hand and build trust with them, saying, hey, here's how it's going to be a little different and here's why that's okay, is really, really important. And we find that's one of like the first things we try to do when we start working with organizations, is get a lay of the land of how it works there.
Yeah, it's interesting because like there's an upskilling that obviously has to happen to like, get access to your work product at the end of the day, right? And it can be pretty invasive, right? There's the everything is changing for the ops folk that are moving to the cloud, but then even for the engineers, it's probably changing a bit too, because probably I assume a lot of times like they start to take on maybe some of that ops work themselves because they can manage it with software. Like what is that? Like what is the story like for those two teams? Like when they start working with a company like 66 Degrees and kind of like acquiring those skills while working with your org to do these migrations.
Right. I mean, I joke with one of our chief architects. We have a running joke where like, who writes the Terraform is like a joke that we often have when we walk into an organization, we walk into a room and there's the app team and this cloud team, this newly formed cloud team. And the app team goes, well, you're the cloud team. You should be worried about deploying it. You write the Terraform. And the cloud teams goes, no, you have to know how to maintain it. You should write the Terraform. And it's just like this classic debate that happens in almost every organization I've been in. And so, the way we think about it, the way I think about it, and what I try to coach folks is like, learning Terraform, and I'm just going to use infrastructure as code as an example because it's kind of the most tangible. Like, you have to do it. It's like a great upskilling. It's not, and it's not, there's some weird, logical leaps that you have to make. But if you're not making this change and like being part of the wave, you're going to be left behind from like a career perspective. And I think it's even more interesting now thinking about, how, generative AI and some of the like coding assist tools come into this. Like we're finding more and more that we can use them to kind of cut down on the learning curve for folks when they have to like start writing code for the first time. But we like it because, my mantra is kind of like the best way to deliver business value is to be as close to the code as possible. Like we're not a strategy consultant. Like we are going to get in and be hands-on with you. And that involves like, getting your hands dirty. And that's kind of our MO, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No. So when you said, I don't know if you saw me just straight up vibe in there. So we were, I was at my day job. I was just at KubeCon last week, and
nice.
that little joke that you have is literally how we start our sales pitch. We're like, who does this in your org, right? And it's funny because people are like, everybody, or like there's very different answers depending on like the maturity of the org, like where they are in like the DevOps maturity model. But then there's like, I do, but I don't like it. Right. And so this is, I mean, I feel like it is a running joke, but I feel like it's a substantial decision and / problems. Like it's.
Yeah. And I mean, I've even seen orgs say, oh, well, that application is really important. We're going to give that team white glove treatment. Everyone else is going to have to learn how to deploy it on their own. We're going to deploy it for this team. And it's like, that's not like, you're not going to get the most value out of that move if you're kind of having those edge cases. Like that was my point of like, we built the data center in the cloud again. Like if you're sticking to those traditional models, that's how it's going to feel. It's like you're just you're recreating it, and this whole value transformation just didn't happen.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the things that's like just truly hard about IAC too, right? Like when we look at like any given cloud API, like there's some attributes that are very ops centric, and then there's like a bag of them that are very developer centric, right? But like this module that we're using or whatever is both. Like we both need to like type the code in to get the thing to work, or we're shoulder tapping, right? So like like what are some of the things that, I mean, and I see this all the time, like day in, day out. I mean, I've friends that start companies where they're trying to figure out, like, do I bring on somebody to do the Terraform, or is it my team's responsibility? Like, what are like the different, I guess, like personas or profiles of like orgs that you see, and like what direction they go, like what leads them down? The ops team does it versus the app team versus like some collaboration layer.
I mean, I think what we see the most of is it going to the app team. and like it's it's reluctant, and so they go to it, and they're the ones that are responsible for maintaining, and the cloud team kind of serves, or the ops team kind of serves as almost like a COE, like a center of excellence, and it's like where they're kind of like part of the architecture review board or whatever type of review board you have, and they're coming in and kind of advising. And so we really see the app team taking control of the situation, which I think is ultimately pretty good for the most part.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's funny because like when you see some of these companies where it's like, oh, the ops team does like all the terraforming, it's like it just kind of becomes like, not Terraform specifically, like any ISC,
sure.
right? Like it kind of becomes like your like new service now where it's like, oh, I want a database, like instead of me just like doing it myself or whatever, it's like I file a ticket and this guy writes some Terraform. Right. So like, how do you like this? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying on that point, like, we do see folks try to implement self-service for their developers, whether it's a tool like Backstage or Spacelift, and we haven't seen those be really super successful at some of our more like traditional enterprises. I know they're really successful product companies, but we've seen those kind of struggle to get adoption. And I haven't really figured out why yet, but it's been interesting. The self-service platforms and we've seen have kind of failed a little bit, which has been interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I've got buddies on both of those worlds. I got a bunch of friends that work over at Spacelift, but yeah, self-service, like it is the ultimate goal, right? But like how much self-service do you give, right? Because like with every inch you give, like there's some maintenance or some sort of burden there for somebody to kind of take care of. What do you like the orgs that are like doing these migrations and they're looking towards something like, oh, we actually want to completely unblock our devs and like lean into self-service. Like, what is driving somebody that direction versus like maybe not looking towards something like, a self-service platform?
I think the ones that are saying, hey, app teams, you control it, are coming to it where it's like a level of ownership. And so in that organization from like top down, they're making the cloud very clear that it's not it's like it's part of their everyday, right? And we even see this with like logging and monitoring, where people haven't wanted to change the way they log and monitor. They're still going to use some of these old legacy tools. And when you kind of shift it to the app teams and put it in their control, I think from the management team, they're saying, the cloud is not just a place for you to deploy a virtual machine. It's going to be part of something that you're doing, and what it really lends it to is then them learning kind of the cloud native aspects of all of these public hyperscalers, where you can really take advantage and get value out of them versus just like migrating over to a virtual machine. Like if they're running Terraform and reading the documentation of how this cloud works, they're going to get more ideas on how to better their application, as opposed to just kind of like pawning it off to a service person to go to deploy. Does that make sense? Like they're going to be in the platform, actually having to understand how it works, thinking about better ways to re-architect, thinking about better ways to build their application, versus just kind of pawning it off. And those are the organizations that are really getting value out of the cloud.
Yeah. And it's funny because like the go-to is to just the easy way. I was in professional service for a while. It's easy to just toss it into a VM, right? It's just like, we did this way, do that. I think one of the things that I've seen personally, I'd love to know kind of how you guys approach this, but like there is we're all hobbyists at heart, right? All of us software, like this is what we like to do. We like to write some software. We do it at work. We do it at home. We do it in our home lab, right? One of the things I think that is like hard when you first get into the cloud is like it's exciting, like right, like if you've been in a data center, like you're and you're an app team, like your interface to those machines for a lot of times is like a Jenkins build, right? I push some code, some magic happens in Jenkins, some stuff ends up on some servers, great. But then when I'm getting to the cloud the first time, I'm like, ooh, I got a little Lambda here I can grab. I got all the databases I could ever want, all the different types of databases I could ever want. Like how do you help teams kind of figure out like what is the right services to start to adopt versus like what is because it's all shiny and new, right? It's all that shiny bauble. Like, how do you help them like kind of craft like this is the thing that's going to make the most sense for your application and business versus like this is what's fun and exciting and going to get people stoked about moving to the cloud?
Right. I think it's a little corny, but
I love corny. That's the best way to start it.
we really like to think about what the business outcome is before the how. Like every engineer loves to jump right to the solution. Like I've yet to meet someone who likes to like sit there and like talk about why we're doing this for an hour. But it's really important for us to say, okay, what do we need this application to do? How much, revenue is it serving, or how many people is it serving, whatever metric they want. And making sure everything can tie back to that outcome is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And kind of having some golden state architectures where we say, all right, when we need this application to serve this many people or have this type of connectivity, here's the playbook for how to do that. And then crafting that with the organization, obviously not just by ourselves. And if we don't do that and we just kind of like, spur all this excitement, what will happen is that something's going to break in a year and then we're going to, we'll be blamed for it, which is fair. But like, that it's starting with the outcome of what we needed to do is what we spend a lot of time thinking about with our customers.
Yeah. It's, for anybody who hasn't worked as a consultant, everything's definitely blameless until you're a consultant, and then you can pin it on you all day long when it's a consultant. That's part of the job. That's why the money is there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a little bit of shared. I would argue it's more of a shared responsibility, but yeah, I know what you mean. I've been doing this long enough. I get it.
Yeah. So you work with a lot of orgs, a lot of different migrations. Like, what are the kinds? I mean, I know that you're very into the people side, and if that's the problem that you love to kind of focus on the most, like happy to talk about that. But like, what are the types of projects, right? That like all these orgs are so different. Like, what's the type of project that you like to see, like starting to do one of these cloud migrations that actually gets you the most excited? Like, what do you like?
Yeah.
Is it like, oh, this old COBOL system that we're going to revitalize in the cloud, or is it?
Yeah. So my favorite type of conversation to have with customers is a little bit like what you just described, not a COBOL system. The joke that I like, maybe let's slow down a little bit, but the joke I like to say is like, sometimes when we're talking about old applications, it's kind of like if you lift a log up in the forest and then a bunch of like bugs crawl out underneath the log. Like that's sometimes how I feel. Like we walk into a meeting and they're like, oh, this hasn't been updated in 15 years and the person's retired that wrote it, so we don't know what's going on.
Oh,
those are really fun for me, just because it's like it seems like an insurmountable challenge. But
wait, how often do you get one of those? Because I feel
that
like
happens. I would say if the organization has maybe if they're a Fortune 500 company and they haven't yet moved to the cloud, they have those hanging out.
They have those.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. You go ahead.
I was saying, like, what's the most exciting about that? Is it like the archaeology of it? Like,
yeah, it's so I like two things about it. One, it's the archaeology, and two, it's figuring out why they made some design decisions that made anyone touching it not possible. Like it's like, the adage about what programming is like you're playing chess against yourself. That is like exactly what's going on there. And so that's one application, like one kind of archetype that I really like. And the other one is when it's a newer one that I'm getting really excited about, but it's when we can we're with a client 2 weeks ago. And I think this is a lot of where app modernization is going, is we were building some proof of concepts for them to use some AI tools to perform Java upgrades for them. And it was taking in their, documentation standards, taking in their code base, and then creating pull requests on GitHub where the engineer would go and review them. And those just get me really jacked up because it's like I hated upgrading code, but now, it's kind of all I have to do is be a reviewer, if that makes sense. So those are kind of like the two, I would say, classifications that make me really, really excited for the most part. The
archaeological digs are so much fun. Like that is, so much fun. I I don't know if I still have it on my Twitter, but that used to be my title, was cloud archaeologist instead of architect. Because it's like, dude, most of my job is not like sitting back and thinking about like how nice something's going to be and drawing some clean lines. It's like, I'm digging a hole that somebody else had already started digging. I'm cleaning a rock. There's some snakes in here. Like,
yes. It gets gnarly really, really quickly. And it's just a fun when those are most fun when they're kind of maybe potentially a little bit low pressure applications.
Yes.
It gets a little more serious and we're like, oh, it's 25% of our revenue. And we're like, oh wait, what's going on here?
Or they're like, it's a life support system. And you're like,
exactly.
Okay. Like,
what were you doing? What prevented it to get here? And so those are fun. And, that's what I'd say. Those are big ones.
So what is the big driver? Like, so I know there's obviously plenty of workloads that make sense on-prem. Like we're seeing like a bit of like repatriation, like we're sort of like, the DHH articles, like everybody's going back to on-prem now. It's like, are they, like, I'm still seeing a lot of people going to the cloud, but like, what are it's like, a little here, a little there. It's just kind of shifting around columns. Like, what is the, what is the big driver of like the organizations you're working with? Like, is AI a lot of the driver of like moving to the cloud, or are they still looking at just like, we need to lower costs or we need to make teams more agile? Like, do we have those more traditional motives, or is it?
So I think it's been really, the last year has been really interesting, because if you had probably asked me that question a year and a half ago, I would say it is definitely still, cost savings. And I don't know, I mean, this is probably this is not the view of my organization, but cost savings, I think, is a hotly debated topic of, is it cheaper to run in the cloud versus on a data center? And I think depending on your financial engineering, you could make a case for both, right? Even though we feel pretty strongly like the cloud is cheaper, but we see people exiting data centers or leaving a contractual obligation that they're not really fond of. So that's like the VMware folks who are like, I'm not dealing with Broadcom, or, hey, we gotta get out of this enterprise agreement with Microsoft for the last 20 years. We're kind of done with that. Like, there's still kind of that, I would say, like traditional or typical cloud migration. But what we're seeing a lot of now is folks saying like, hey, is our architecture of this app that we migrated, 2 years ago, ready to be consumed by AI or with AI, right? Like, hey, we have to harden this or start exposing more microservices so that we're thinking about it to be ready when we need to get there for some AI work. And that has been really, really interesting. It introduces a new set of problems for cloud engineering that have been exciting for me. It's one of the things I like about cloud engineering, is you're kind of like always in the middle of that. And so it's kind of like both. I mean, we have a lot of, and especially with, the past year, we just had a meeting about this week with our team, but we've gone from, POC to production in the AI world, where we're really focused on production now. And when we start getting things into production, it introduces a whole new set of infrastructure problems and cloud problems and DevOps problems that, we're tackling right now. Like, how do we create a service-oriented architecture for AI agents to talk to each other? That not many people are talking about that, and this is what's like on the top of mind of a lot of CTOs and CIOs that we work with. They're like, okay, great, we're in BigQuery, for example, or we're in Aurora, but I have this product team bugging me about getting this agent deployed. Like, how are we going to do that safely and securely and make it scale and not have it blow my budget out of the water? Those are all really new, interesting tasks for us, I'd say.
Yeah, I haven't really started working with like agentic stuff yet. Like, does that tend to be like, do those tend to be like request based, or are they kind of like actors that are acting on their own? Like, are they handling HTTP requests and just like doing something in like a long running job, or does it tend to be more like background workers where they're kind of like interacting with different systems?
Yeah, we have been thinking a lot about it as a backroom actor. Like, if you think about it, we think that one of like a really good example of this is like a procurement agent, if you will. And so there's a procurement agent and this is where I think some of this is going. And you can see I think this is really analogous to like the journey to the cloud, like this logical and like change management leap that I was talking about, how people are resistant to change. Like, this is the same thing. Like, we're kind of entering that paradigm, in my opinion. But it's like, okay, so we have this procurement agent. they're kind of acting like a business analyst. They're responsible for going, let's say, procuring a VM from whichever hyperscaler is the best based on these criteria. That AI agent has to somehow talk to the ERP system through some sort of microservice backend connection, and then deploy it into their cloud, or execute the purchase agreement. And so that's kind of I would call that a backend kind of happening behind the scenes. But what's really cool is it introduces kind of like, how do you monitor and evaluate that agent, right? What's the rubric that they're graded on if you treat them like an employee who was doing a similar task way back when? And so those are really early on conversations. But for the cloud team, when we get involved, it's like, hey, is our architecture hardened for this? What's the API interaction between these agents and these other services? How are we logging and monitoring? And then like, what's the security around them? And those conversations are just starting. And the way it's an exciting time to be in that space. So we are definitely having those with customers. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Like, so this is just a space I haven't really gotten into much, but it seems like there's almost like a new class of error, right? Like there's errors in prod, like prod goes down, you get a 500, files not found, whatever, right? Then there's our bugs. I didn't get the logic quite right. I introduced the bug. But then there's the hallucinations. Right. Where like where the system just starts behaving oddly, right? Especially when it's like, maybe this one's procuring some stuff, and it's like, hey, you know what? I could use a little more RAM.
Right. Like, and so how do you evaluate that? And we're starting to have those conversations. This is obviously, I think, the folks that are doing that level of like autonomy are on the bleeding edge. But if we talk back to like the class of projects we're working on, like if we are not if you're not thinking about right now when you're deploying architectures into the cloud about how would this be consumed by something that is not a human or a backend service that's a kind of a typical HTTP request, like you have to start kind of reorienting the way you're thinking about it, which has been fun.
Yeah. I started dabbling like very recently in like a proof of concept, and it's interesting because like the one I'm working on is to kind of help people through like bugs in their infrastructure as code. Like I found something not quite right, but it's interesting because like there's a lot of context there that like me as a developer, if I was working on it, that I just know, right? Like I've done this for a while, right? But then, for a model, like it might be able to generate some stuff, but there's a lot of the system that this Terraform or whatever is going into that it doesn't, right? The model's trained on God knows what, but then there's like my metrics, my actual architecture of the cloud, like what other systems, like what is the request volume, right? And it starts to get very interesting. There's like a lot of information that I can give a model, but how much information do I need to give this model, right? It's like that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out now, like with some of my customers, is like trying to figure out like how much context do I need to give this thing that it doesn't currently have access to get a good answer without giving it too much, right? Because it's like, it might be lobbing over like 5 megs of information, right?
Yes. That's really interesting. Yeah. I haven't thought about that before. That's really cool. Yeah, I haven't done that yet.
It's weird. I have no idea what I don't know if anybody outside of like OpenAI and Anthropic know what they're doing. So I'm definitely like caveman style. Like I'm just kind of beating a wrench on a model. But
no, awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. So like with the clients who are like kind of, they're wanting to move to the cloud because they're getting into AI the first time. Like you guys are working with AI with a lot of organizations. Like how do you, right, there's obviously your customers' goals, but like how is 66 Degrees looking at AI for how they help you serve your customers better? Or is
I think. Oh no, go ahead.
If you can talk about that, I didn't want to.
Oh yeah, I can. I think it's all good. So I think we trialed code completion tools, or whatever coding agents, and we're our engineers that are hands on keyboard are using that. What I think I use it. These are some of the things that I do. I have to review statements of work in our organization. It's one of the things I do, and I pre-read. I have an agent or a model or whatever pre-read the statement of work before I get to it, and kind of like check out items that I always call out. So like, hey, are we going to prod or dev? Like if that's not in the statement of work, we need that. And I have a list of questions that I ask of it before I even read it, which is great. We've seen our sales team be really successful in background research about potential opportunities for customers and learning about the organization. And kind of, hey, asking of the thing, they just did this project. What's the next best project for us? And we obviously feed in all of our data from, our CRM system that says, hey, they've done, they did a migration, they did a database proof of concept. Chances are, here's the next best project for them to work on and for you to go pitch them. So you can feed in a lot of like your enterprise data and get that out of it. And then the last, which is a fun one for us, because I think, it's funny. We were just talking about this week. Like, no, I don't think any engineers. I've yet also to meet one who like loves writing documentation. I don't know if that's you, but like I'm not. No one's a big documentation person. Like what I mean.
I love the concept.
Yeah.
I love the concept of writing documentation.
Yeah. And we have potential metrics. Hey, as an engineer, if you write one case study a year, it's going to show up on your performance review. Great. And what we have seen is being able to take technical design documents like TDDs and convert those into case studies just automatically. And then you tweak them, right? You can say, hey, what's the situation? What's the complication? And here is the outcome. And enough of that is in the TDD that when our engineers can go and do that, and then they obviously edit it and, tweak it as it need be. But just being able to crank out an 80 or 75% solution quickly is like actually game changing for us.
And case studies are hard. Like
really hard.
Like even just getting started on one can feel like a task. It's like having it like 70% of the way there, where you're like just in like an edit mode. That actually seems pretty valuable, right? Because I think one of, at least from my time, like one of the most valuable things you can do as a consultant is spending that time to make the materials that let people know how good you do, right? Like trust. Trust is the number one step, I think, in selling some sort of operations package to somebody.
100%. And like, I think those tasks really help our customers in a way. Like if we can, the other joke that I like to say, and when people talk about, hey, AI is going to take my job away in the IT space. It's like, I've never met someone in IT and a CIO who is like, hey, we have this week free from work. Like there's no backlog. Like everyone is time strapped. Like if there's any, I've never met anyone like open up someone's Jira and look at their backlog. And I guarantee you they're like a sprint or two behind. Like there's just no one is operating like that. And if we can help them do something that is like 10% faster, it's going to make their lives like, that's the big thing with the change. It's like, we're not replacing you because, obviously maybe some things will be replaced in the future. So I can't I'm not, whatever. But if we can get you 10% of your time back today, let's do that and make it a little bit easier on you. And we are seeing that with both AI and even moving to the cloud, like in a traditional, like an app mod project. Like there's ways we can save that time for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry to stay on AI so much, but like,
you're good.
I know that you guys are doing a ton with it. So I'm just super interested. One of the things I think, I had a really great interview a few weeks back with, someone from Google, and they were talking about how like they're starting to incorporate and starting to think about how AI exists as a part of like the platform, like your platform, like your business's IDP or whatnot. Like, are you seeing companies like looking to incorporate like AI and like their models into like the platform that they're giving to their devs, or is that like far off from where they are? They're just trying to get their apps to be able to use it, not necessarily.
I think right now I think the percentage of companies that are doing that is slim.
Okay.
But I don't see that being too far away of having like I'm really hot on this agent stuff right now. I don't see it too far away where you have an agent on your DevOps team helping you complete your job as a coworker. Like that's, I think that is definitely coming. Right now, we're still seeing people doing things like chatbots, enterprise search, model building successfully and moving them into production. But I think we're early adopters of folks that are doing that.
Yeah, it's like I feel like at some point in time you're going to start seeing like your agentic bots showing up in backstage. They'll be like your microservice, and you're like, hey, Todd right here, he's a robot, and like you can give him this work, and here's who's responsible for this robot.
It's a little freaky. I mean, I saw Lattice and came out and they said they're releasing a scorecard for AI employee like performance reviews, and at that point I was like, oh geez, like this is really gonna change. But what we see engineers, I think in 5-10 years from now, engineers are going to be orchestrators who are responsible for working with these agents and orchestrating them. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but that's how I see it. I don't think engineering is going to go away, because I think you still have to have you have to understand what's going on a little bit under the hood. Kind of like right now, like I think everyone takes one computer science class about chip design, or I think it was called organization and architecture for us. And like you learn about binary and how to like work on PDP-8s is what we did. Yep. You do that once, right? Like you're going to take one programming language class where you learn how to program language, or like a data structures class, sure. But I think it's then really going to get into this orchestration kind of movement, and they'll be living in the platform, just like you said. They'll be making pull requests and approving pull requests. Like that's how it's going to work, which I think is it's a little scary, but it should be interesting.
Yeah, I have a thing that I go to because I feel like I've been asked just so many times by people like, oh, like how do you think it's going to affect the job market? And I've got I don't know if it's a bleak answer. I don't know if it's bleak or positive. It's somewhere in between, but it's like a bit of a conundrum too. It's like, I think that if you genuinely are afraid of AI taking your job, it will. And if you're not,
correct,
it won't. And I think that distinction of like, I understand the value that I can provide to the system, whether it's me typing to, a compiler or me typing to a bot, like 100%. The human element's still pretty important. And I think that we'll get to a point where it gets much better at like organizing the context and understanding the business than we do. But like the amount of politics and culture that go into like getting shit done in ops is significant. And like, I don't see that unless you're like training it on like people, like your actual interactions with your team, right? Like there's so much like for a job that is so technical, where we're as ops people so far from like the product, we have a lot of people problems in our space, right?
It's one of my two things on that. I'm probably I'm cribbing this from someone, but like I don't know if there's been a technology movement that hasn't been like inflationary, meaning it's grown the pie, even though at the time it feels like it's going to take it away. Mm-hmm. And I have faith in that probably will continue. The second is like what you just said about that classification of problems is why I like cloud engineering and platform engineering so much, is because you get this not weird, but the tier of problem with a technology problem, which my joke is almost every technology problem is solvable that we encounter through either hard work or just really hard thinking. Like we can always figure it out. Like it's not the biggest mountain to climb. It's a mountain sometimes, but it's solvable. Colliding really hard with like a business decision that's being made, like, hey, this is gonna, have to start taking 70,000 requests a second. Okay. And then the people problem where the person down the hall from you is like, well, that's not how we do things. I'm not doing it like that. And that like confluence and collision is, I just think, fascinating. It's like, I don't know where else it happens in organizations. And it's why I like talking to the CIOs and CTOs, because when you hear about all of those insights and politics and tech problems, it's just really fascinating to me.
Yeah. Do you actually see like the companies you work with? Like, do you guys try to target like a specific like maturity and like DevOps of the companies you're helping, or do you get companies that are kind of all over the gamut of like, we are cloud ready, we're ready to go, and other people are just like, we are in 1998 still? Yeah,
we get all over the place. So what we find though is it's kind of like a bimodal distribution though. The folks that are, hey, we're in the 1980s, to use your language, and to my clients, if they're listening to this, you're not stuck in the 1980s, but they're typically the ones. No, you're good. They're typically the ones doing the cloud migration. So they're taking the first step.
Yeah.
And the folks that are kind of in the middle, where they've got a DevOps practice, they know what they're doing. They're kind of doing app mod. And then the ones that are, really far along, our cloud team might not be helping with them. We might be doing a lot of augmentation work with them where we're just adding fuel to the fire, or they're really working with some of our other practices doing more, cloud native stuff. But like to this day, we're still seeing a lot of folks migrate. Like you said, like people are still migrating. Like we're still running into, hey, what is CI/CD? How does CI/CD work? And their expectation, which is I think fair, is that their time to value should be super small compared to how it was 5 years ago, because all these problems have been solved, which is true. But sometimes what we run into is all the other problems that slow us down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, when you're seeing like developers and like DevOps teams like kind of interact with one of these new platforms to them for the first time, whether it's like the Google Cloud platform or something like Backstage, right? Yeah. A lot of times like they need to see like how it kind of like fits into their world, right? Like how it fits into their mental model, right? Like, I mean, we have people on my team that like probably may not even know what cloud that we're running on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's so much new technology they're getting presented with. And then there's like the interface that they're going to have, whether that's their GitHub Actions and that's their interface to the world, or whether they're hopping into GCP and they're like, we're just going to do ClickOps because this whole thing's new to us. Like how is your team kind of thinking about like the platforms and like the processes that you're going to give these teams? Like, are you approaching it in like, hey, this is the best way to run in the cloud solution? Or are you still finding that like, these teams are very different? I mean, they obviously are, but like, are you finding that they actually need different solutions? Like this team definitely is like ready to move towards something like platform engineering and getting an IDP versus, this team definitely just needs like an M0 and something to automate their infrastructure. And they're not quite ready for, the full platform engineering gamut. Yeah. Like how do you kind of work through that with those customers and what do you see in there?
Yeah. So we, if I search for ClickOps I have a Slack alert for anyone says ClickOps, I get pinged and I immediately say, no, what are we doing? Why isn't my team involved? What do you mean we're doing ClickOps? But that was a joke. But so I think what it comes down to is really the classification of project. So if we're doing a data center migration for someone, we are going to push them to a platform engineering solution. We're going to ask them to make that leap during the migration because it's the easiest time to do it. Meaning we're instituting enough change as it is. This change for the better is fine. There are still some folks smaller organizations that are fine with just simple, Terraform or just like, hey, even some ClickOps if they're doing kind of like proof of value and proof of concept type work. But our kind of bias is always to be getting them on the most robust DevOps platform possible. Because we think it's going to give them more value out of being in the cloud and reduce headaches for them, even if there's a little bit of a learning curve to get going. Like it's the way that we always try to lead with that.
Yeah. Do you ever feel that but like introducing to a platform like could actually like ease that learning curve, right? Because I feel like
yes.
a lot of times like that's one of the things that's kind of fun and scary about the cloud is there's so much stuff to learn. But like if you're given like, hey, this is how I interact with the cloud. Like I've got some modules in Backstage that I use to get my different resources. Like you've kind of lowered that surface area for them, like, and make it a bit easier to understand. And I was actually really curious, is that like, hey, we're going to get you on the cloud and then we're going to bring this other big change later.
100%. If they're, and like, we see that often where like, hey, we're going to deploy new stuff to the cloud for the first 6 months and maintain 2 environments. And they see how easy their life is for those 6 months when they're deploying new things. And then they're like, wait a second, I have to go back to the data center and figure out how to migrate all this stuff. I don't want to do that. Like, I want to just build it new in the cloud. And so I 100% agree. Introducing those tools and that's like that thinking, and you can do that in like formal classrooms or like hackathons is something that we really like doing, or just through osmosis of working with, consultants hand in hand, which is the pitch, obviously, can make it really, make it easy. So I 100% agree. That's a huge thing we see.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the people that are kind of like leading these migrations on the other side, like what do you see as like some of like the common like blind spots that they just don't that either you guys catch like too late, or like what is a common blind spot people have as they're starting to do these migrations to the cloud?
Yeah, I would say the biggest blind spot is usually, I mean, there's always it always takes a little bit longer than they initially think. There's always usually bugs that don't get, resolved. So like, it's not a silver bullet is at the end of the day. Like if your application before you make this migration has, has latency problems, moving it to the cloud might resolve some of them, but it also might not. And so like thinking about it as a silver bullet, just because you don't have to worry about the power going out at your data center or it flooding or there being a tornado or whatever, a natural disaster, it's not a silver bullet moving to the cloud. I think that's really one of the big things. And then the joke that I made, but it's true. I had a CIO who said, I don't want this migration just to be a dashboard with the number of virtual machines that we have left to migrate. And treating it as a like for like, and this is true of any change in an organization, whether you're rolling out a new platform, like if you're treating it as a like for like, as opposed to like a plus one on the other side, you're gonna feel hurt in 6 to 8 months. And so those are kind of the two big things that we see.
Yeah,
I would say.
That's really interesting. I feel like there's so many potential blind spots, and like just kind of like there's so many blind spots, right? But it's like it's also one of these places where it's like it can be hard to figure out like what blind spots you even have, right? Because it's just so fundamentally different than like where you're running today, right? So like I've seen this with customers where they're like, oh, like we didn't think we had to worry about that because we're like, oh, like we're moving to the cloud, they have everything. It's like, and then they get there and they're like, oh, what do you mean there's not a managed service for this esoteric database, right? And it's just like, well, there's not, and like they're like, yeah, it's like, hey, it's running on Solaris, and we're like, oh, like.
Yeah,
you just created an interesting problem for me to solve, right? Like, but like it can be very, very hard to find these sometimes because just like the thought model and just like the things are so different. Like once they get there,
yeah, and no one has been thinking like these things are usually running by themselves at this point. Like no one's really thinking about what platform has to change, and even the idea of running applications in multiple regions inside the cloud is something that can be incredibly confusing and difficult for organizations to get their head around. And for us, and what we always tell our teams is to like, you have to tell them the best practices and really make sure they understand why we're doing it that way. And not since they're, that's part of the gig. It's like, we are here to be that change agent and institute those best practices, even if it's a little bit kind of difficult to get through.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of companies? I experienced this in my professional services days. I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious if you see it and how you handle it, if so. But like, you get this customer every once in a while that's like, it might not be like one of the upper stakeholders, but it's usually an engineer who's like,
okay,
we actually do need to run active in 2 regions, and you're like, you don't. Like you don't like I mean, right? It's like it's like, well, what do we do if AWS goes down? It's like, well, I mean, most of the internet's going to be broken, right? I mean, there's definitely cases where it makes sense to run multi-region, but the person that's like the teams that are like just a bit too overly excited about it, like, oh, this is what we have to do because this is like true disaster recovery. Like, do you see a lot of people that are like reaching for that prematurely without like understanding the effects of?
Oh yeah, all the time. Literally, like this. I think this week we were having that conversation with about that. Usually it's a DR issue. Is usually what it is. And we try to empathize with why they're saying that. And hey, is there a business reason for why you're saying? Like, if we tie it back to the why, like, hey, is your uptime needed to be that high? What happens if this goes down? How much revenue are you losing? And those are sometimes difficult conversations, and most of the time for us, the reason we might be advising them a different way is we think it's right for them, and we have our own constraints that we're trying to hit, and introducing that complexity is going to make it more difficult for everyone to get done. I think for the folks that, we've run into people that have said, hey, I want my storage system replicated across 3 different clouds so that I can switch over, cloud storage to S3 to blob storage on Azure. And we're like, why? Like, what are you worried about? Like, are you, and we're usually in are you doomsday prepper? Like, if 2 clouds go down, we're all screwed. Like, if you think about it, right? Like, we're at war, like something's bad. Yeah. But just having those conversations is the way we try to do that. And then, kind of like I said before, if you've earned trust early on in relationships when you're enacting these change, those conversations get a little bit easier down the road, because they know you're not. Sometimes people are just trying to not show off, but make it known that they know what they're doing, and that's a way to kind of earn their trust and advise them, steer them the other direction.
Yeah, it's like I've had that do this as well, and it is awkward because they're like, but this is how we stay up forever, and it's like, right. Every single one of those 9s that we add on to the end is more expensive than the last. Correct. And I think I think I've met companies where they don't care about the egress costs or the ingress costs, but when you get to the engineering cost of now your engineers have to think of that might be a pretty serious application rewrite to have a database that can be in 2 regions, right? Unless you're doing reads here and writes there, but you still got that single-ish point of failure, right? And I think
I was gonna say, if you have a CIO or a CTO that isn't technical like me, they might miss that. They might miss that in the engineering cost or the change that has to happen. I 100% agree. We see that all the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on time.
Okay.
If you have a few more minutes, there is a new thing we started doing. We just started about a week ago, and it is optional because I'm springing it on you.
That's fine.
But we started doing this little thing that I call trash ops, and so it is a extremely long list of questions that is growing with everybody I tell about this because I think of funny questions. But I'm just going to grab 3 random questions and. They're just to expose the dirtiest secrets we have in DevOps. So I want to hit you with just 3 of them and
I'll try.
And see where we go.
Sounds good. I'll try my best.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be interesting because, so it'll be interesting. Okay. So first one, do you name your servers? So I guess this will have to be pre-pets. Or sorry, this will be in the pets area for everybody that's thinking cattle. Do you name your servers after characters from TV shows or movies or?
I don't. I think it's kind of weird to be referring to machines like that. I think I will say I do. So I guess I used to, and now I don't. As when I was first starting out in my career, I had a Slack bot that was named after one of my the robot from the movie Interstellar. I have subsequently graduated from that phase of my development career, though. So I don't, and I don't think many of our customers do either. I kind of just take the boring, business name - environment name. That's a good question, though.
Okay, I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever rationed a hackathon allowance to pay for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
I've not.
What?
I've not. We've gotten pretty What do you mean by that? Rationed as in pulled back?
Yeah, let's say you're getting $50 a day for your hackathon.
Oh, okay.
Are you okay, I'm ordering breakfast, lunch, and dinner now?
Yeah.
Or you're yeah?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay, what's your go-to on a hackathon lunch?
I will do. I think it's a little counterintuitive, but I always do pizza for hackathons. If I'm, it kind of puts you to sleep, but it also kind of brings back the college in me, where it's you're just eating a bunch of crap food. I think it kind of helps fuel when you're hacking away like that.
It feels the hacker mind.
Correct. You have to. Yeah.
We did a hackathon last year, and one of my teammates, he's the one that came up with this. He's like, I was splitting every day. I was ordering breakfast, lunch, and dinner with that. And I was like, I was ordering lunch and then a bottle of wine for dinner. I put
See, that's the
these
good
on.
thing with pizza is you can, it's kind of all 3 meals. It
is all 3 meals, yeah.
In a sad way, but yeah.
All right. Last question. Have you ever taken down production twice in one day?
Oh yeah. 2+, I would say.
2+?
I've taken down production more than once in a day for sure.
Do you have a story that you remember?
It was legitimately not having good enough test coverage and deploying. I was deploying fixes to fixes, and it just kept on like breaking it. And I had it was luckily an internal application, so it wasn't the end of the world, but it was also at the end of quarter. That was where it was needed. And I had to go back, and it was internal facing, but it was still customer facing. And basically what was happening is an order management tool, and orders could still get taken, but they weren't being provisioned. Like they weren't getting invoices generated. Like all of the back end process wasn't happening. So I had to go back through the logs like one by one and extract all the orders as I was logging them to like our cloud logging system to be able to place them by hand. So that was pretty painful. But that was probably that's the worst one I've had. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we could have got to that story. I shuffled it like right before you said you were down.
Okay.
And the fourth question was, what is the most amount of times you've had to revert a PR before you're able to get a fix in?
I think I've done it 3 times before. Like that was God, that was painful. That's bringing up some bad memory. That's like going to a place in my brain that I don't know if I want to go back to anymore.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, we'll refresh it. If you could remove one database off the face of the planet, which one would it be?
SQL Server, probably.
Oh yeah. See, now we end on a positive note. We don't have bad memories come in. Everybody that's listening is like, SQL Server is gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate the time. Where can people find you on LinkedIn, Twitter, around the webs? Yeah,
I'm not too active on Twitter. I'm like a lurker of other people, as most folks are on Twitter. But you can find me on LinkedIn or our website. I'm more than happy to talk about DevOps and all the stuff you're working on.
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah.
And awesome. Everybody, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Platform Engineering Podcast. Have a topic you would love to learn more about? Let us know at Corey@massdriver.cloud. That's CORY@MASSDRIVER.cloud. Catch you on the next one.